What is going on, everybody? I'm AJ, and I'm going to give you guys a boxing breakdown on Jake Paul versus Ben Askren. Yes, I did research this fight. I just was really interested in researching it, and so I looked into it, and I came away with a bet. So super excited to break down this fight. Highly anticipated, a fight between a person very well known in Jake Paul for YouTubing. I guess that's the word, YouTubing. As well as other things as well. And now he's got a 2-0 professional boxing record, and he's taking on former MMA fighter Ben Askren. So currently right now on best fight odds, we have Jake Paul sits as the favorite, depending on what book you look at. He could be had anywhere between -155 and -189. The comeback on Askren, I'm seeing prices between anywhere from +120 to +150. So relatively competitive fight. I know that some people are a bit perplexed as to why Paul is the favorite. I could justify him as the favorite, which we'll get into. And it's an interesting dynamic, right? Because although Askren is much more accomplished in combat sports, wrestling, boxing is a different ballgame, right? And just as we'll get into, it's one of those provenness versus potentials type matchup. And I do tend to side with provenness more of the two, just from a completely blank perspective. However, this fight is a different circumstance to me, and we'll talk about why I do favor Jake Paul to win. So as touched on, this is a stand-up fight, right? So it's going to be just, basically just boxing, just hands, no kicks, obviously. There's going to be some clinching, which we'll get into, which I think could help Askren, but it's just a boxing fight. And so when we have a boxing fight here, we got some advantages on the Paul side. We have Paul at 12 years younger. He's 24 years old compared to Askren, who's 36. Paul will actually have around a 3 or 4 inch reach advantage. There's some sources that are conflicting one another, but regardless, Paul has the reach advantage nonetheless, which generally helps you win striking exchanges, especially if you're the faster and more technical boxer of the two. And I think Paul is here after watching tape. There are just 2 professional boxing matches of Paul. The one fight that goes the furthest just goes into the second round. So it begs the question, what is his cardio like? What is his durability like? He hasn't really been punched all too much from his boxing fights. Maybe it looks fine, but it's still an unknown to consider nonetheless. So that's definitely something that's noteworthy, right? Just watching the film, it's pretty obvious that Paul is the better technical boxer. Just his punches are just much more sharp. I'd say his defense is better. He's got better counters, better variety. He'll work the body more. His combinations are better. His defense is better. He just moves better than Askren, and he has more power than Askren does. As I said, though, I think that Askren's best chance to kind of wear Paul out is just to clinch as often as possible. We even saw Nate Robinson do that against Jake Paul. He was doing it very, very frequently. But Askren, I think that'll be in his best interest, and I think that's what the game plan he's going to go in and do. Just as a sort of a natural grappler. He does look to get the clinch in his MMA fights. And I think this will be no different here. That's actually pretty smart of Askren to do, because if Paul's cardio isn't in check, Paul could fatigue. The clinch exchanges could help Askren. It also keeps him out of danger from getting knocked out in open space. And who knows, down the line, maybe Askren could earn a stoppage himself if Paul is just completely gassed, or we find out that he does have somewhat of a durability liability. And so just some stats. We actually do have some statistical data for this fight. Obviously, Askren has fought in the UFC. So looking at UFCstats.com, Askren absorbed 5.66 significant strikes per minute with a 36% striking defense, which is just far inferior to the UFC average. And we saw this in more than one fight, right? We saw this in the Damian Maia fight. Damian Maia was besting him on the feet. Obviously, there's just some brief sequences there between Robbie Lawler and Jorge Masvidal, but Askren has never really been known as a great striker. I think that Paul's footwork is better. He circles much more evasively, I'd say. Askren's pretty flat-footed. He tends to follow the opposition rather than cutting him off. So I just think that the movement of Paul could potentially cause Askren troubles, at least while fresh. And that should help Paul win the aggregate of the striking exchanges. Again, like we talked about, Paul has the 4-inch reach. I think his punches are just sharper. He's got better counters. He's got more power. I think his combinations, defense, and variety is all better than Askren's. And I think that Askren will look to clinch. But with that point, something I noticed on tape is Askren tends to lead with his head on entries for clinch exchanges, which leaves him vulnerable to an uppercut or a counter right hand. It's just not a good tendency to have when you're leading with your head. So it's definitely something that I could see Paul capitalizing on, just being the faster fighter, just him just looking at tape and seeing that tendency from Askren. I think that there's definitely reason to believe that Paul could do something and earn a knockout shot. Like I said, though, I could only cap Paul so high because, and I'm capping him at 65% chance to win. So I agree roughly with where the odds are. Therefore, I don't see value on either side because, again, his cardio, his durability is still mostly an unknown. We've only seen him box for 2 rounds. And the level of competition, right? Obviously, Askren has a much more proven resume. Even though it is an MMA, he's just fought, better combat fighters. So it does leave an interesting unknown on the Paul side. But the data that we do have, I tend to think that Paul should be favored around where he currently is. Again, he's got the youth factor going in his favor, the reach factor. Those are 2 intangibles that help you win long term, again, especially if he's the faster and more technical guy, which I do think is the case here. So that's kind of the dynamic of the fight. I just think that, early Paul, while he's fresh, assuming he doesn't have cardio issues, he will have big advantages in the footwork, technique, defense, combinations, power. And it's just kind of up to Askren to really neutralize that and kind of win down the stretch. So official prediction here is going to be Jake Paul to win in the first round. I got some comments here. Roshan, what's up, Roshan? Free stream. Yeah, man. Free stream. Looking forward to it. And let's do this, man. Join. Yeah. Appreciate you shouting me out there, man. Let's do this. So, yeah, man. I mean, this is the way I see the fight going down. It's not something that I want to bet on. I don't want to bet on Paul. I think that where he's lined at is fair. But my bet that I do have on this fight is the under 5.5 rounds. I put 1.5 units on that. So 1.5% of my betting bankroll on the under 5.5 rounds. I just think that most likely Paul gets the job done early. And as kind of like, I guess, a hedge, if he happens to, gas out, Askren, even though he's not known as a dangerous striker, if Paul's just completely gassed, I mean, there could just be just a TKO stoppage just because he's not defending himself enough for the referee's liking. And so I tend to like that bet more than just, again, Paul money line or even Paul TKO. I like the under 5.5 rounds. This is an 8-round fight. So that is my play on this event. Obviously there's a ton of hype going into this fight. They've been jawing at each other for a while. So this fight is, I think, rightfully getting a lot of attention and I'm really looking forward to it. I'm going to be prioritizing the UFC event because obviously that's going to be going on at the same time, but I will catch this fight after it takes place. I'll be following along on Twitter, following the news and all that sort of good stuff. So that is the breakdown for the fight. Again, official prediction is Jake Paul to win by KO in round 1. And my bet is the under 5.5 rounds. I put 1.5 units, so 1.5% of my betting bankroll on that prop. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I wish you all the best of luck and take care.